There are a few men who have succeeded in changing the course of an entire club, and Silvio Berlusconi is one of these men. Under the controversial Italian, the Rossoneri was able to write their own successful history in the world of Italian, European, and international football. He brought in talents, stars, titles, geniuses, joy, and sadness. This is the story of Milan in the era of Silvio Berlusconi.
Ancelotti destro, gol! Grandissimo gol! È un gol incredibile! Fai calcio a te, lo titoli? Franco Baresi! E il Milan vince la tua! Il Milan per il campione d'Europa!
After Milan had won their second European Cup in 1969 under the legendary duo of manager Neri Rocco and captain Gianni Rivera, the Rossoneri were primed for a successful 70s. But what actually happened on the pitch was well below expectations, as throughout the 70s Milan only won 3 Coppa Italia titles, 1 European Cup Winners' Cup in 1973, and a single Scudetto, which was delivered by the Swedish manager Nils Lidholm in 1979. The team included a young defender called Franco Baresi in his second season with the Rossoneri, and also the legendary captain Gianni Rivera, playing in his last season as a footballer. What followed in the early 80s was nothing short of a disaster. In the 79-80 season, Milan finished in 3rd position, but evidence from the Italian financial police had revealed Milan's involvement within the 1980 Italian football betting scandal, dubbed later on the Totonero Scandal. The punishment included Milan's relegation to Serie B, a life ban handed to Milan president Felice Colombo, and several other suspensions to a few Rossoneri players. Although they went back up to the first division after a single season, they struggled immensely. This time they finished in one of the relegation spots in the 81-82 season purely based on their performances on the pitch. And thus Milan were back in Serie B once again. Several players left after their relegation, as Milan handed the captaincy to a 22-year-old defender named Franco Baresi. Milan succeeded in returning straight to Serie A, but the team entered a transitional period within the next few seasons. Although young Paolo Maldini debuted in the 84-85 season at only 16 years of age, and despite of the return of manager Lidholm and the arrival of names such as the English duo of Haitley and Wilkins, as well as the World Cup winner Paolo Rossi, Milan failed to win the Scudetto within that period. The 85-86 season was a troubling one, as it saw huge protests from the Rossoneri fans aimed towards club president Giuseppe Farina after their round of 16 exit from the UEFA Cup against Varachem. And the protests were not only performance related, but the club was in financial turmoil and dealing with many debts and were on risk of bankruptcy. Thus appeared a banner at the San Siro that urged a specific man to buy the club, and that banner wrote the name of Silvio Berlusconi. Berlusconi had acquired fame and riches within that period through his Fininvest media group, which made millions by entertaining the whole nation through its channels. Silvio was intelligent in terms of amassing assets and friends in high places, and after conquering the world of media and publication, he set his sights on the second biggest asset in Italy, Calcio. Silvio Berlusconi came in to buy Milan in February, and officially became the Rossoneri's new president on the 24th of March 1986. Berlusconi said, "Milan is a team, but it's also a product to sell, something to offer on the market." Part of Silvio's vision for Milan included more than simply winning on the pitch. It entails being part of something bigger, representing a lifestyle. So he opened an apparel shop near the city's world-famous Duomo di Milano. Silvio wanted the Rossoneri to become a progressive and modern club, but to truly make Milan relevant and famous around the world, he needs to build a strong team, one of the best in history. The first few months, and after a few observations, Silvio decided to introduce some key changes. First, he appointed a psychologist to aid the players. Then he brought several architects to improve Milan's training facility, which is called Milanello. Those architects would then visit the training center each year in the following seasons. And finally, Berlusconi brought a dietitian after he noticed the players' bad eating habits. Silvio was laying the foundations of a successful club, but eventually, personnel changes were needed, and the first big transfer of the new regime was the signing of Roberto Donadoni. Berlusconi's arrival was the reason season tickets for the San Siro rose in the 1986-87 season. But Milan were struggling on the pitch as Leidholm was sacked 5 matches before the end of the season. His assistant Fabio Capello took over as caretaker. And thanks to league top goal scorer Verdis, who scored 17 league goals, Milan managed to end the season in 5th position. Amid Milan's numerous losses that season, Silvio Berlusconi managed to find his next manager. In the Coppa Italia round of 16, Milan faced Parma, who were playing in Serie B at that time. They had an unknown 40-year-old manager who managed to will his team to a win at the San Siro and earn a quarter-final berth. Berlusconi had dinner with that manager and told him that he'll coach Milan the following season. That manager's name was Arrigo Sacchi. Sacchi never competed beyond the 4th division as a footballer and was working as a shoe salesman. At 27, he started his managerial career as he slowly climbed the ranks with a few different clubs, as he proceeded to help Parma promote to the 2nd division in his first season, and immediately caught the eyes of Berlusconi after 2 victories against Milan in the Coppa Italia. Although Silvio had his trust, Italian media outlets were hugely skeptical given the manager's limited coaching accolades and his almost irrelevant playing career. This pushed Sacchi to mention his famous saying, which was aimed to all his critics, as he said, "I never knew that in order to be a jockey, you have to first be a horse." This was at a time when Milan were linked to the great Trapattoni and other successful managers. That's why Sacchi had to deliver, and deliver he did. Milan had to be smart in the transfer market, as the Italian league only allowed 2 foreigners per team. That's why the English duo of Haitley and Wilkins were sold and replaced by the Dutch duo of Ruud Gullit and Van Basten, who was Europe's top goal scorer at only 21 years of age. Carlo Ancelotti joined from Roma, Angelo Colombo came from Udine, while a young Costa Curta came back from a loan. Sacchi had a strong squad, so the pressure was mounting from the beginning, as the fans were expecting positive results immediately. But Milan's start to the season was inconsistent, as they fell to the 4th position after a loss against Roma in the 11th round. On the other hand, Napoli started their title defense campaign strongly. Sacchi was given plenty of time to implement his philosophies and tactics, and the players needed convincing. And Van Basten's injury in the beginning of the season complicated matters. So after crashing out of the UEFA Cup against Espanyol in November of 1987, Italian media outlets wrote about Sacchi's expected sacking, but he had Berlusconi's backing. Slowly but surely, the team started implementing Sacchi's ideas within his famous formation, the 4-4-2, as wins started to pile up. Milan's matchup against the leaders Napoli in January demonstrated all of Sacchi's ideas, as the team won by 4-1. This match saw the star of the season Gullit lay his mark, as he ended up winning the Ballon d'Or a month earlier. Milan played an aggressive press, controlled the spaces, and applied the offside trap in an aggressive manner, all hallmarks of Sacchi's way of football. Milan kicked into gear for the rest of the campaign and won against Napoli once again in an epic match at the San Paolo, which pushed them to the top with 3 matches to go. They kept their lead until the end of the season and won their 11th Scudetto and the first in 9 years. In the following season, the Italian Federation increased the tally of foreigners allowed per club to 3 players. And after 40 years since Milan had formed the famous Swedish trio of Gren, Nordahl and Leidholm, Berlusconi signed Frank Rijkaard to form the famous Dutch trio in Milano. And fresh off their win in the 1988 Euros, the Dutch trio were ready to conquer the biggest clubs in Europe in the European Cup. As Gullit had said before the season had begun, the Scudetto is not enough. With their early elimination in the Coppa Italia and the strong start of their neighbors Inter Milan in the league, the focus quickly shifted for Milan to the European Cup, led by the Dutch trio that made history as the first teammates that finished first, second and third within the Ballon d'Or standings. Milan won against Levski Sofia in the first round. and then faced Yugoslavian side Red Star in the second round. After a 1-1 draw at the San Siro, the Rossoneri played a difficult match in the second leg, with Red Star leading by a goal, and after Verdis was sent off, Sacchi was in trouble. Suddenly, the weather got worse, as the heavy fog covered the stadium, and visibility was an issue for the players, so the referee decided to replay the match the following day, and based on the rules in those days, the match would be replayed disregarding the goal and the sending off. And thanks to that, Milan managed to pass this tough test after winning through penalties. Milan won against German side Werder Bremen in the quarterfinals to face Real Madrid in the semis. Madrid's Dutch manager Leo Ben Hacker studied Milan closely and noted that Milan were not a typical Italian team, as they didn't sit back and defend. And the first leg at the Bernabeu reflected that sentiment, as the Rossoneri controlled the match, but Madrid managed to open the scoring thanks to Hugo Sanchez. Van Basten leveled the score with a beautiful header.
Van Basten stupendo!
And despite the draw, Milan showed their dominance. The second leg perfectly demonstrated that gap in strength between the two teams, as the Rossoneri dominated by scoring 5 goals at the San Siro.
Ancelotti destro, gol! Grandissimo gol di Ancelotti!
In what was a historic night which pushed Sacchi's reputation to the top. As the Spanish journalist Quima Bravo wrote, with Sacchi, football began to have 4 references: the ball, the opponent, the teammate, and the space. And this was Sacchi's great legacy. He showed the importance of collective strength, as each player followed a single and common goal. Nobody controlled the spaces in the past as Sacchi. The culture of moving without the ball was unleashed, as the relationship between player, ball, and space was underlined. And this is why Sacchi's teams were famous and successful. In the European Cup final at the Camp Nou, the Rossoneri faced Romanian side Steaua Bucharest, whom won the prize at the expense of Barcelona in '86. Under the eyes of tens of thousands of Rossoneri fans, Milan managed to score 4 goals without reply, thanks to braces from Gullit and Van Basten.
Destro, gol! Gol! Stupendo gol!
As Milan lifted their 3rd European Cup and the first since 1969, Berlusconi achieved his most important goal and laid the foundation for one of the best teams in history. Milan's European dominance was not translating to the Italian league, which is a testament to how strong Serie A was in those days. And this is despite having Van Basten, who was the top goal scorer of the league with 19 goals, and he also won back-to-back Ballon d'Ors. But the Rossoneri yet again failed to win the Scudetto in 1990. And that happened after some controversial decisions. After a slow start to the season, Milan came storming back to close the gap to Napoli and were league leaders by February. In the 31st round, Milan were 1 point ahead of Napoli at the top of the standings, but had to settle for a draw against Bologna. On the other side, Napoli were drawing with Atalanta in Bergamo until the 77th minute, when a coin was thrown by the Atalanta fans and unfortunately injured a Napoli player. The injured Napoli player refused to return to the pitch as the match was halted. The sports judge awarded Napoli the full points, and as a win equaled 2 points at that time, Napoli drew level with Milan at the top of the standings with 3 matches to go. Milan then suffered a surprising loss at Hellas Verona as they conceded in the final minutes. The match also saw Van Basten, Costa Curta, Rijkaard, and Sacchi sent off. Napoli eventually managed to win their 2nd Scudetto on the final day. Despite that, Sacchi's men managed to win the European Super Cup against Barcelona and also the Intercontinental Cup against Atletico Nacional. But with the league title gone and a loss against Juve in the Coppa Italia final, Milan once again had to focus on the European Cup to salvage their season. The Rossoneri passed the test of Real Madrid yet again in the round of 16 and managed to get to the semi-final stage after a tough outing against Belgium side Michelin. Their battle against Bayern München was tough, especially with the absence of Ruud Gullit, who suffered from knee problems throughout the season and had to miss several important matches. The first leg at the San Siro ended with a solitary goal from Van Basten from the spot. The second leg was tense and got all the way to extra time, but was decided by Borgonovo, who scored a precious away goal.
il gol del Milan. Il gol del Milan.
To successfully send the Rossoneri to their second European final in a row. They faced a Benfica side managed by the Swedish manager Eriksson, and Portuguese sides at that time were one of the best in Europe. But Milan were favourites, especially with Gullit's return. It was a well-balanced and tactical final between the two sides, but Rijkaard managed to bomb forward and receive a well-timed pass from Van Basten to score the winner. Milan were champions of Europe again.
Vince la sua Coppa dei Campioni, seconda consecutiva, quarta della sua storia.
Although Sacchi's methods were revolutionary and advanced, they can also be exhausting and mentally draining for the players. So as the team entered their fourth season with the manager, it was destined to be a difficult one. Despite winning the European Super Cup and their second Intercontinental Cup in a row, cracks started to appear within Sacchi's formidable team. Entering the month of January of 1991, the Rossoneri's results were mostly inconsistent, especially with Maldini's injury and Van Basten's loss of form. Several historians and ex-players mentioned in their autobiographies that the problems between Sacchi and both Van Basten and Gullit started within that period. The Dutch duo were sick of Sacchi's rigid routines, habits, and numerous tactical sessions. All of this negative energy was reflected in their quarter-final matchup against French side Marseille in the European Cup. Marseille were French champions and one of the favorites for the European Cup. Their president Bernard Tapie was carrying out a similar project to Berlusconi's at Milano. He had a star-studded squad. That's why with the sending off of Van Basten in the previous round against Club Brugge and with the absence of Baresi in the first leg, the French side had a golden chance to advance. With the first leg ending in a 1-1 draw, La Repubblica published an article which leaked an ultimatum from Berlusconi to Sacchi, which stated that if he failed to win the league or European Cup, he would be sacked. So pressure was mounting as the two teams faced in the second leg at Marseille. The French side started strongly and managed to translate that positive start into a goal in the 75th minute. The floodlights went off in the final minutes as the referee stopped the match for 20 minutes. Milan players led by Galliani pressured the referee to replay the match at a later time, but the ref refused and called to restart the match.
Il faut qu'il impose aux Italiens de reprendre le jeu.
The Italian side refused to continue the match as the European Federation decided to hand Marseille the victory and handed the Rossoneri a ban from European competitions for a whole year. The Rossoneri crashed out of the Coppa Italia as well, and Sampdoria managed to win a historic Scudetto. So as the article had mentioned in the middle of the season, and with Sacchi's deteriorating relationship with some Milan stars, Berlusconi decided to sack the Italian manager in June of 1991. Berlusconi managed to replace Sacchi instantly and didn't search outside the club to bring the new manager, as Fabio Capello was chosen to lead the Rossoneri. Like Sacchi when he first got the job, Capello's managerial experience was limited. He coached the Primavera side for 2 years and took over the first team as a caretaker in 1987 after Laidholm's sacking. But unlike Sacchi, Capello had bundles of experience as a player when he played for Italy's biggest clubs in his long and successful career. Ex-Milan player Filippo Galli, who played under both Sacchi and Capello, had mentioned that Capello knew us. He was a Milan player and knew the whole atmosphere. He had a great ability in managing egos and different personalities. But Capello was described by the media as Berlusconi's right-hand man, the guy who says yes to all of the president's requests. So was Capello the right choice? He had a lot to prove. Demetrio Albertini came back from a loan to boost Capello's squad, and Capello mentioned in his first presser that he'll build on Sacchi's legacy, but he'll also look for a different kind of football. So that's why he didn't change the squad or formation a lot, but the results on the pitch were much more different.
He's got ahead of him. This is Rijkaard, and that's the second goal.
Basten lo supera, Gullit ancora, una finta, poi Gullit dentro per Massaro, la palla.
Capello's Milan were dominating teams, and the players looked fresher and at their best, and Capello decided to use the innovative rotation system to prevent injuries, keep energy levels high, and make sure to involve every player in the squad. No European participation helped Milan as well. Milan snatched the Scudetto in a historic manner. The Rossoneri remained undefeated throughout the season. In total, they had 22 wins and drew in 12 matches in 34 matches overall in the league. They scored 74 goals, which is the best record and is 16 goals more than the second highest team. At the age of 27, Van Basten enjoyed one of his best seasons ever, as he scored 25 goals and assisted a further 11 in 31 total Serie A matches. The Rossoneri defense, which had goalkeeper Rossi, the defenders Baresi, Costa Curta, Tassotti and Maldini, helped Milan concede only 21 goals. Capello said recently, "It's very difficult to find 4 defenders who are so technically good and so quick. It was the best defense in the world. An invincible season by a rookie coach and against all expectations. Leading a team that rewrote history under Sacchi was always going to be hard for Capello. But Fabio managed to get out of Sacchi's shadows from his very first season, and the train was moving at high speeds. So who can stop them now?" To match Sacchi's achievements, you have to win the European Cup. Although Ancelotti retired, Capello knew how crucial team depth was, as he wanted to continue implementing the rotation system in the new season. This is why Berlusconi decided to spend again in the transfer market. The limit of foreigners in Serie A increased to 4 players, and given that Capello's rotation was effective, Milan brought in 3 new foreigners. The Ballon d'Or winner in 1991, Jean-Pierre Papin, joined for a record fee at that time. Yugoslavian star Dejan Savicevic joined, along with Boban, who came back from a loan. The Rossoneri had 6 foreigners whom rotated throughout the season to help overcome the serious injury of Van Basten as well as Gullit's poor form. Capello's system was effective yet again as they continued their good form in Serie A as they broke the record after going 58 league matches undefeated, the record which dated back to the 91-92 season and lasted for 22 months. They succeeded in retaining the Scudetto, despite Van Basten's absence from December to April. The Dutchman had started the season strongly as he scored 18 goals in 16 matches and earned his 3rd Ballon d'Or before his ankle injury in December. The European Cup was back on their agenda, which was newly named the Champions League and included more European champions from across the continent. And as they've done in the league, Milan dominated the early rounds of the competition and managed to get to the European final after winning all their matches and conceding a solitary goal. Capello decided to play Van Basten, who recently returned from injury, in the final, with him Rijkaard in the middle and Papin on the bench to complete the 3 allowed foreigners within European competitions. Their opponents were French side Marseille again, the last team that knocked them out of the competition. Under the president Tapie, they had been French champions 5 years in a row and were European mainstays throughout that period. The final was balanced, and the French keeper Fabien Barthez succeeded in keeping out several key chances.
Bravo Barthez! Super arrêt de Barthez!
Marseille took their chance with a corner kick and opened the scoring. Papin's entrance from the bench was not effective, while Van Basten's injury proved to be the final blow for Milan, as Marseille lifted the European Cup for the first time in the history of French football. Months later, it was revealed that Marseille were involved in a match-fixing scandal within the French league, which relegated them to the 2nd division. But there was no proof of any match-fixing in their European matches. Thus, they remained champions of Europe. Milan's famous Dutch trio had their days numbered coming into the season. Gullit was loaned to Sampdoria, Rijkaard was sold to Ajax, while Van Basten looked to be sidelined again for a long time because of his ankle injury. Silvio Berlsuconi needed to break the bank again to continue competing in Europe. Thus came Brian Laudrup and Christian Panucci, and the Frenchman Marcel Desailly after impressing Capello in the European Cup final. Milan had a new look to them that season, as they carved out positive results through their solid defense. There was a scoring problem in the team. especially with Van Basten's injury, so most of their focus was on trying to shut out their opponents. Despite fierce competition from both Juve and Parma, the Rossoneri won their third Scudetto in a row and broke some historic records on the way. The Rossoneri conceded only a staggering 15 goals in 34 matches in the league, the lowest figure ever in an 18-team championship. They also remained unbeaten in 38 away matches in the league, a streak that started way back in September of '91. Their Italian keeper Sebastian Rossi kept a clean sheet for 929 minutes, a record that stood strong for 22 years. And with that Scudetto, the Rossoneri passed their rivals and neighbors Inter Milan with 14 Scudetti. And having been knocked out of the Coppa Italia yet again, their focus once again shifted to the Champions League. After passing both Aarau and Copenhagen, Milan were drawn in a tough group with the likes of Porto, Bremen and Anderlecht. The Rossoneri managed to top the group with 8 points and went on to face Arsene Wenger and his team Monaco in the semi-final stage. Monaco's squad was full of serious names, but the Rossoneri proved their European dominance as they scored 3 goals without reply and got to their 4th European final under Berlusconi's reign. They would face the dream team of Barcelona in the final, the team that was managed by Johan Cruyff and boosted by stars like Stoichkov, Romario and Ronald Koeman. They won the European title in 1992 and entered this final as Spanish champions 4 years in a row. With the absence of players like Baresi and Costa Curta due to suspension and Van Basten due to injury, the media showed some favoritism towards Barcelona, as Albertini mentioned that if I saw the newspapers before the day of the match, it would look like they already won the cup. Johan Cruyff even acknowledged this favoritism and said in his press conference that Milan works quite well in terms of organization. We could say that they play in a practical way, but in terms of football, they are no big deal. Romario was confident as well and said, "We're going to win the European Cup. I'm sure we'll beat Milan in Athens." It was very easy for Capello to motivate his players prior to the final. He only had to show these quotes, but he had an important decision to take with regards to Desailly's position on the pitch within the final. The Frenchman played effectively as a pivot throughout the season, but with Baresi and Costa Curta's absence, Capello wanted to play Desailly as a defender just as he did at Marseille, but the Frenchman was not convinced. In the end, Capello decided to play Galli alongside Maldini at the heart of the defense and kept Desailly in midfield, which could have been the decision that gave Milan the upper hand. Despite the media favoritism towards Barcelona, there was no doubt that the '94 European final had the best 2 teams in the continent, and everybody expected a close match, but in reality, it was far from it.
Totonero in penetrazione, buona Massaro, gol del Milan, strepitosa azione, gli ruba la palla e poi segna un gol incredibile, strepitoso, Albertini, Desailly solo, gol, e sono 4, il Milan.
Tactically, Capello played a perfect and a historic match. He knew Barcelona were better in possession and build-up play, so he tried to increase the tempo and pressure the Barca players whenever they entered Milan's half. As Albertini had said, "We built the game on the basis of depressing their desire to play football, and we succeeded." The Rossoneri won the final by 4 goals to 0 and matched the biggest winning margin in a European final, and won their 5th European Cup and the 3rd under Berlusconi's reign. And speaking of the president, for the first time he wasn't there to celebrate with the team, as he had just won the Italian elections of 1994 to become Italy's new prime minister. It was the beginning of a new chapter for Milan, as Berlusconi focused more on his political career. The summer saw very little in terms of signings, as Di Canio joined from Juve. Departures included Laudrup Papan as well as Gullit. That season saw the introduction of the 3 points for a win rule. Attack-oriented teams were given more incentive to win, as the Bianconeri were one of the biggest benefactors after their manager Marcello Lippi managed to get the most out of their dangerous attacking trio of Baggio, Vialli and Ravanelli. So after a slow start for Milan in the league and losing both legs against Juve, they found themselves out of the Scudetto race for the first time in 3 seasons. They were eliminated again in the Coppa Italia, but managed to pick up the Italian Super Cup as well as the European Super Cup against Arsenal. In the Champions League, the Rossoneri were the biggest favourites, especially as they were drawn in a group that contained Ajax, Salzburg and Athens, but they were given a warning from their first match day against an Ajax side managed by Louis van Gaal. The Dutch side had stars of the past, present and future, like Danny Blind, the Boer twins, Jari Litmanen and ex-Milan star Frank Rijkaard, and also boosted by young talents like David, Kluivert, Seedorf and Overmars. And they proved that they belonged with Europe's elite when they beat Milan by 2 goals in Amsterdam.
En Litmanen scored 2-0.
The Rossoneri were struggling in the Champions League group stage as they were docked 2 points against Salzburg after the fans threw a bottle at the Salzburg keeper, and UEFA banned Milan from playing at the San Siro for the rest of the group stage. After a draw and a win against Greek side Athens and a new loss against Ajax, Milan had to win their final match against Salzburg to qualify, and thanks to Massaro's solitary goal, the Rossoneri barely got through to the next round. Milan was a different team in the knockout stages, as they beat Benfica and Paris Saint-Germain in both the quarter and semi-finals without conceding a single goal. They were in their 3rd final in a row and the 5th European final in 7 seasons, an exceptional feat, especially as the Champions League was expanding each year in those days. Unfortunately for the Rossoneri, they had to face Ajax again, the team that just scored 5 goals against Bayern in the previous round, the team that just won the Eredivisie as invincibles. It was a golden opportunity for Milan to equal Madrid as the team with the most European Cups. But the Dutch side were the favourites, as it was in the final of 1969. So can the Rossoneri repeat history? It was a very balanced final with limited chances, but after the young Kluivert entered in the second half, he received a pass inside the box and took a shot against the keeper Rossi. And with 5 minutes to go, Milan couldn't respond and lost yet another Champions League final. In 1995, football transactions were changed forever after the Bosman ruling. Not only did it mean that football players could leave in a free transfer at the end of their contracts without their old club receiving a transfer fee, but the European Court of Justice also lifted the quotas placed by leagues to restrict the number of foreigners or non-nationals allowed in each team. This meant that Berlusconi would spend in the summer transfer market yet again. With Roberto Baggio's issues with Juve, Milan took advantage and bought him for 9.3 million euros. He was joined by Paolo Futre and the young duo of Ambrosini and Patrick Vieira. But Milan were missing a certain player for years. In the last couple of seasons, the Rossoneri played without a pure number 9. When Van Basten was injured in the 1993 Champions League final, he underwent his 3rd ankle surgery in his short footballing career and had to miss the whole 93-94 season. He was hoping that he'd come back for the following season, but his ankle injury was a persistent and nagging issue and wouldn't heal. The Dutchman finally conceded defeat, and on August of 1995, Van Basten called for a short press conference.
La notizia è corta, semplicemente ho deciso di smettere a fare calciatore, tutto lì.
Van Basten was only 30 years of age on that day, and in front of 60,000 fans, he ran on the pitch for the last time, and Capello couldn't handle that sad reality.
Di vista molto alto ma agile, veloce, da una tecnica sopraffina e poi un giocatore micidiale in area di rigore, una freddezza vista a pochissimi campioni.
Milan filled that huge gap by signing with the Liberian George Weah, who was only 1 year younger than Van Basten. He joined Milan after great seasons with Paris Saint-Germain. Weah had the height, the strength, and was skillful with the ball. He demonstrated his goal-scoring talents almost instantly in Serie A. Weah was gifted with a total attacking package, as he can score, assist, and also link up play with his teammates effectively. His performances throughout the year earned him the Ballon d'Or in 1995. It was also the first time that non-Europeans were eligible to win the prize after voting was open for international players. And Weah was the first and only African to win the prestigious prize till this day. With the way and the genius of Baggio and Savicevic, Milan started their Scudetto campaign strongly. A single loss in their opening 24 matches pushed Milan to the top of the standings ahead of rivals Juve, Parma and Fiorentina. Fabio Capello proved yet again that he was capable of getting the most out of his squad, especially after long years of competition and success. Key wins against Parma and Fiorentina in the closing months handed Milan the Scudetto with a healthy margin. They won their 15th Scudetto and the 4th in the last 5 seasons under Capello. The Rossoneri also succeeded in winning an official title in 9 consecutive seasons, as Berlusconi had succeeded in changing Milan's fortunes for the better in just under a decade. But in the following seasons, the Rossoneri will face some hardships for the first time in Berlusconi's reign. The following seasons would prove to be the toughest in Berlusconi's reign. That period coincided with Galliani and general manager Ariedo Braida taking more responsibilities, as Berlusconi was focusing more on his political career. The trouble started when Capello left for Real Madrid, and the Rossoneri wanted to replace him with Trapattoni, but he left for Bayern München. So Milan chose the Uruguayan manager Oscar Tabarez after an impressive season with Cagliari. Despite a busy transfer market, the season was destined for failure. The core of the team was largely unchanged, but losses kept piling up, and after crashing out of the group stage of the Champions League and Coppa Italia, Tabarez was sacked. Berlusconi decided to bring back Sacchi. The Italian coach had just left the Azzurri post a month earlier, but unfortunately his appointment didn't help in changing Milan's fortunes. Sacchi took over the Rossoneri for 23 league matches. He won in 7, drawn in 7, and the rest were losses, as they ended up finishing in 11th position, 10 points away from the European spots and 6 points ahead of the relegation spots. Those defeats included a horrible week for Rossoneri fans, as they saw their team lose at the San Siro at the hands of Juve by 6 goals to 1. And then lost the Derby della Madonnina by 3 goals to 1. Sacchi left at the end, along with the Capitano Baresi and Tassotti, whom retired.
Sei per sempre Franco Baresi!
As everybody witnessed the worst season of the Berlusconi era. That was until the following season. The new season saw Capello's return after winning La Liga with Madrid, and just like Sacchi, Capello returned to restore glory to the Rossoneri. But just like his predecessor, Capello failed to find success. As with the retirement of both Tassotti and Baresi, names such as Marco Simone and Roberto Baggio left the club. But Milan reinforced the team as always, with the arrival of Kluivert, Leonardo and others. But unfortunately for the team, many of these new signings would flop, as events of the previous season would be repeated. Capello waited until his 5th match to register his first win, and with heavy losses to Roma, Inter and Juve, the struggles of last season were on display, despite not having any European commitments. The Rossoneri ended the new season without a title after their loss in the Coppa Italia final against Lazio, and finished the season in 10th position in the league, as Capello left the San Siro again, but this time through the back door. Massimo Ambrosini was part of the team in the previous 2 seasons and was starting to make a name for himself. He explained the reason both Sacchi and Capello failed, as he said, when Sacchi came back the situation was already compromised, and when Capello came back, something was broken inside the group. The players weren't as motivated as before. That's why those years were a bit difficult. It was obvious that Milan needed to open a new chapter with a new manager. So Milan chose a young Italian manager called Alberto Zaccheroni, after several successful seasons with Udinese. And with him came the German striker Oliver Bierhoff and the Danish wingback Thomas Helveg. As usual, Milan were busy in the summer transfer market, as new names were brought in, and big names departed the Rossoneri after great contributions like Desai and Savicevic. Zaccheroni was surprised to learn from Galliani that there were no specific objectives for the season. They had little ambitions and only hoped to get back to the Champions League. So it was clear that Milan were not favourites for the Scudetto, but Zach had a clear vision and tactical setup, as he used his favoured 3-4-3, which worked very well in his time at Udinese. He also had the personnel at Milan to effectively deploy that specific formation. With the struggles of Inter and Juve after the injuries to both Del Piero and Ronaldo, there was a chance for the other teams, but nobody expected Milan to play this well.
Porta vuota e Wea mette dentro il quinto gol.
Calza ha portato in vantaggio il Milan al 20.
Wea parte Leonardo invece gol! Il gol di Leonardo!
Slowly but surely, the race for the Scudetto was between the trio of Fiorentina, Lazio and Milan. The 3-4-3 worked to perfection as Milan made use of Bierhoff's form, whom scored 19 goals in the league, along with the brilliance of Leonardo, Giulio on the wings, the Liberian Weah and the Croatian Boban. After the draw at the Olimpico against Lazio, Milan were 7 points away from the leaders with 7 matches left. In any other season, this would be over. But Milan managed to win 6 straight matches, which included big wins against Parma, Udinese and Juve. While on the other side, Lazio slipped up in several matches, until Milan led the standings with a 1-point gap and only a match to go at Perugia.
Sarà il suo primo importante successo in carriera.
Giulio scored, and Bierhoff sealed the win. As Milan won their 16th Scudetto. Ambrosini had said recently that team was not structured to be able to compete at the highest level. In fact, winning the Scudetto was a surprise for everyone. Was this a new chapter of success for Milan, or was it only a mirage in the middle of the desert? A strange thing happened in the following years, as Galliani and Braida's signings in the transfer market were improving. However, Milan's results on the pitch didn't reflect that. With Milan's return to the Champions League, they managed to sign with the star and top goal scorer of last year's tournament, the Ukrainian Andrei Shevchenko from Dynamo Kiev, and other players joined him as well, such as Gattuso and Serginho. Shevchenko would prove himself instantly, as he scored in the Italian league opener against Lecce. And continued on to score 24 goals in Serie A, to be the first player since Michel Platini to become league top goal scorer in his first season, and went on to score 29 goals in all competitions. But despite the Ukrainian goal-scoring form, Zaccheroni failed to repeat the success of last season, as they crashed out of the group stage of the Champions League after competing in a tough group. The team failed to convert the numerous draws throughout the season into wins, which meant that the Rossoneri would settle with third position behind Juve and champions Lazio. Zaccheroni would keep his job for next season, as Milan tried to strengthen the team yet again, and their ultimate goal was to compete in the Champions League final, which will be hosted at the San Siro. But one of the Rossoneri's most important transfers that season, the Argentinian Redondo from Madrid, got injured and never returned to the pitch for almost 2.5 years. The Italian Francesco Coco was brought back from loan and was a big part of the team. The Rossoneri started the season in good form and managed to win against Barcelona at the Camp Nou in the Champions League group stages, but performances would dip in December after the team suffered from several injuries, which forced most of their midfield to be absent. The Scudetto was now out of reach. What kept Zaccheroni's job was their European performances, as they topped their group, which included the likes of Barcelona, Leeds and Besiktas. But the Rossoneri suffered in the second group stage, and after a solitary win in 6 matches, they were out of the competition in March. Berlusconi interfered in club decisions again, and fired Zaccheroni immediately, as the tandem of Cesare Maldini and Tassotti took over as caretakers. Despite their failure to seal a Champions League qualifying spot, they managed to deliver a historic performance in May of 2001 when they faced eternal rivals Inter in the Derby della Madonnina and won by 6 goals.
Serginho! 6-0!
A result that was never done since the birth of the league in the current formation. In the previous season, coveted Turkish manager Fatih Terim and his team Fiorentina successfully eliminated Milan in the Coppa Italia semi-finals alongside his Portuguese star Rui Costa. The Turkish manager came to Italy after winning the Turkish league in 4 consecutive seasons and also managed to win the UEFA Cup with Galatasaray. That's why Milan's management decided to put faith in the Turkish manager for the new season. And they also wanted the jewel of Fiorentina, the Portuguese Rui Costa, as well. After fierce competition between Milan and Parma, the Rossoneri managed to sign the Portuguese star for a hefty price of 41 million euros. Milan didn't stop there, as they brought Pippo Inzaghi, Andrea Pirlo and others, as they went on to spend around 145 million euros, which was considered Milan's most expensive transfer window and the biggest in Berlusconi's reign ever. It also nearly doubled Milan's previous transfer record in 1999. Evidently, expectations were high for the season, but all their Scudetto hopes came tumbling down by November after a loss to Torino, which pushed Milan down to 5th position in the standings. Despite some positive results in the UEFA Cup, management had enough of the Turkish manager, especially after some players cited various communication issues with the manager, as he failed to transfer his ideas to the players because of his almost non-existent Italian. Galliani took a quick decision after that loss to Torino, as he called ex-Milan player Carlo Ancelotti, who was on his way back to Parma after a tough stint with Juve. Galliani reminded Ancelotti of his commitment before retiring as a player. If Milan had called him as a coach, he would have given them priority over everybody else. Ancelotti was considered a bold choice at that time, as after a good period with Parma, he took over Juventus for 2 seasons and a half. And despite having many world-renowned stars in the squad, Ancelotti failed to win an official title and only won the Intertoto Cup. And now he comes to a team that paid a lot of money, but without recent success. Journalist Andrea Massala wrote at that time, Ancelotti is practically a football son to Origo Sacchi. He always wanted to attack. But Ancelotti was not able to change the path of the team. He needed time to get the most out of the squad, although he did manage to show his knack for knockout competitions after successfully qualifying to the semi-final stages of both the UEFA Cup and Coppa Italia. Ancelotti did succeed in securing a Champions League spot in the final match, the competition which is still considered the most important in Berlusconi's eyes. Milan spent again in the summer, as Lazio's Capitano Alessandro Nesta joined the Rossoneri. Seedorf joined from Inter as well, while Rivaldo came on a free transfer. But it could be said that the most important revelation that year was the arrival of Belgian doctor Jean-Pierre Merciman, who helped in building Milan Lab. With Redondo's injury that sidelined him for over 2 years, Milan lost the 17 million euros they spent to sign the Argentinian. They wanted to decrease the risk of that ever happening again. Inspired by Dynamo Kiev's revelation in sports medicine in the 80s, Milan successfully duplicated those methods with the help of Dr. Merciman. Milan Lab was tasked to provide technological and medical support to reduce the risk of injuries and to assist the players in producing their best on the pitch. One of the first examples of success for Milan Lab was when Inter sold Seedorf because of constant groin issues. After visiting the lab, the Dutchman had his wisdom teeth removed and the issue was successfully resolved, and Seedorf went on to have a long and successful career. Other teams have caught up with these methods nowadays, but in 2002, it was almost unheard of. Ancelotti commented on these methods and said, "For the first time, we started to think about the use of technology as a fundamental tool to establish total workload of a player." And in personal terms, Ancelotti started building many relationships with the players, and one of his first big decisions was to play Pirlo as a holding midfielder. In those days, everybody saw that Pirlo played as an attacking midfielder, as in the previous season, he would never play whenever Rui Costa was in the lineup. But Carlo suggested the holding position in August of 2002, as Pirlo agreed with that change and said that he played in that position under the manager Mazzoni in his days at Brescia. In the Champions League group stages, and with Shevchenko's absence because of injury in the beginning of the season, Milan visited the Riazor Stadium to face a strong Deportivo side, and here was the birth of Ancelotti's favorite formation, the 4-3-2-1. With Dida's return from loan to cover for the injured Abbiati, and Pirlo in front of the defense, Gattuso and Seedorf to complete the midfield, and then Rui Costa and Rivaldo as the roaming duo under the lone striker Inzaghi, Milan thrashed Deportivo. After that dominating performance, the Rossoneri showed Europe that they meant business. and despite inconsistent performances in the league and Shevchenko's slow return from injury, Milan got all the way to the semi-finals of the Champions League to face city rivals Inter Milan in a fiery and tense encounter. Ambrosini said about that derby, "It was a week full of tension that never existed before and will never exist again." Milan were missing Pirlo in the first leg, as the Rossoneri got a goalless draw. The San Siro was now the Giuseppe Meazza, as the second leg started with Pirlo back in the side. Shevchenko managed to score the all-important away goal before the end of the first half. Martin scored the equalizer in the dying minutes, but it was not enough, as Milan booked their place in the Champions League final for the sixth time under Berlusconi's reign.
È finita! Il Milan è in finale!
The final was an all-Italian affair, as Juventus got to the final at Old Trafford. There were many subplots for this final. One of these subplots was Carlo against his former team to erase his media-assigned label as a loser. But Ancelotti said before the final, "I'm not interested in erasing that label. What interests me most is to bring this cup to Milan." With Nedved missing the final, Lippi entered with caution as he used the 4-4-2 but with Zambrotta as a left winger. Ancelotti also entered with caution but with a different formation, the ever-reliable 4-3-1-2. What resulted was a final with limited chances and no goals after extra time. The biggest chance came from an Inzaghi header. Johan Cruyff commented on this final and said, "UEFA should not award the prize. This is not football." The Rossoneri managed to win the big prize after some crucial saves from Brazilian keeper Dida and a winning penalty from the ever-reliable Shevchenko. Paolo Maldini was named player of the Champions League final as he lifted his fourth European Cup and his first as a Rossoneri captain. Almost 40 years after his father Cesare won the same cup at Wembley in 1963. 3 days following the final, Milan won the Coppa Italia against Roma to end the season with a resounding success. And finally, Ancelotti responded to all his critics. Dr. Jean-Pierre Mersman was given more authority in terms of transfer decisions within the club. He managed to analyze players over 30 and sign them on cheaper fees. One of the first examples of that was the arrival of the Brazilian Cafu from Roma at 32 years of age. And with the help of Milan Lab, the Brazilian managed to have a longer career because of that. But a smart club is the one that recruits for the future in the middle of success. So when ex-Milan player Leonardo was raving about a young Brazilian named Kaka and said that this player is one whom you can build something with, Galliani didn't hesitate and signed with the young Brazilian. Glasses, neatly combed hair, and the face of a good boy. The only thing missing was his school bag that contained his books and snacks. Those were actually Ancelotti's first impressions of Kaka. Nobody really knew the Brazilian's real potential, but he quickly proved that he was not only considered the future, but the present as well.
Kaka, la trova, non lo chiude nessuno! Kaka! Gol de Kaka che consigue il tanto para el Milan. Kaka 2-0! Kaka 2-0!
Because of Kaka's quick integration with the team, Ancelotti decided to use the 4-3-1-2 34 times in the league in order to play Kaka just behind the two strikers. And the young Brazilian managed to nail that spot permanently from Rivaldo, which led to the Brazilian veteran cancelling his contract and opting to leave for Greek side Olympiacos. After a positive start to the season, the race for the Scudetto was between Carlo's Milan and Capello's Roma. It was neck and neck between the two rivals, but the Rossoneri managed to win 15 out of 17 league matches between November and March, and managed to seal the Scudetto after a head-to-head match against the Giallorossi at the San Siro. League top goal scorer Andrei Shevchenko scored the winner. After failed attempts at Parma and Juve, Carlo Ancelotti finally got his hands on the Scudetto, which was considered number 17 for the Rossoneri. Milan won the title by gaining the most points in the three-point era in a league that contained 18 teams. In the Champions League, Milan looked like favourites again, and pushed that narrative further when they won the first leg of the quarterfinals against a strong Deportivo La Coruña side by 4-1. But in the second leg at the Riazor Stadium, everybody witnessed what was a historic comeback after Milan lost by 4-0 and exited the competition.
Fran deflection, 4-0!
Maybe the Rossoneri players were overconfident and were too comfortable as they lost their focus within the match, but the events of the following season would prove that this match was certainly not a freak accident. Despite the surprising loss at Deportivo, Milan were still considered strong favourites for the Champions League. The squad was strengthened further with the arrival of Dutch defender Jaap Stam and the Argentinian striker Hernan Crespo on loan. Milan certainly wanted to compete on all fronts. The fierce competition for the Scudetto between Milan and Juve got more tense until Milan took the top spot in February. Both teams were trading places until their encounter at the San Siro in May. The two teams entered the match with 76 points, but Milan had a slight goal difference advantage. The match was decided by Juve striker Trezeguet. And Milan failed to equalize and dropped more points after 3 straight draws and eventually handed the Scudetto to the Bianconeri. The Champions League campaign was going smoothly as the Rossoneri topped their strong group and went on to beat Manchester United and rivals Inter in the round of 16 and quarter-final stages.
This is Shevchenko!
They were strong favourites to get back to the European final again as they drew underdogs PSV Eindhoven, but Gus Hidding's team made life difficult for Ancelotti's men. The semi-final first leg at the San Siro saw Milan win by 2 goals.
Here is Shevchenko, onside, inevitably scoring.
But it was a hard-fought match as PSV missed some big chances. In the second leg, the Dutch side managed to convert those chances into goals.
To pick up the cross, and the header is in from Koku. Here is Kaka. And Rossini! But when it matters, Milan deliver. Hesseling, Koku, maybe they aren't done. And it is the last touch of the evening.
Milan qualified to the final at the Atatürk Stadium in Istanbul, which would see them face Liverpool. It was considered the final with the most previous Champions League titles, as the Rossoneri had won the competition 6 times, while the Reds had won it 4 times at that time. But this version of Liverpool was not the strongest. They entered this match as huge underdogs, as they ended their Premier League campaign a whole 37 points behind the champions Chelsea. Ancelotti reflected that gap in his press conference, as he said, "This time we are much less tense than the 2003 final. We know our chances and we are convinced of winning." The Rossoneri start to the final mirrored those thoughts and demonstrated the huge gap between the two sides, as Milan managed to score 3 goals by playing beautiful and attacking football.
Look at that from Kaka, and what a pass too for Crespo.
Liverpool looked out of ideas, as the Rossoneri were getting ready to celebrate their 7th European title. But Ambrosini mentioned that Ancelotti was cautious at half-time and said to the players, "The game is not over." And he was absolutely right, as this game has showed us many times before that a football match doesn't end until the final whistle.
Shevchenko, who scored the decisive penalty in the shootout at Old Trafford 2 years ago, which won the Champions League.
Picking yourself up after that devastating final is a hard task for any player or manager. But Berlusconi never stopped supporting the team. With Crespo's return to Chelsea and the departure of Thomasson, Milan brought in the striker Gilardino to cover some attacking roles. And they also signed Jankulovski from Udinese to cover some defensive roles, especially as the defensive line was aging. The team managed to quickly put the memory of the Istanbul final behind them, as they performed pretty well in Serie A and the Champions League. With a stable formation and squad which lasted for over 2 years with no huge changes, Ancelotti's men managed to top their group in the Champions League and then beat both Bayern and Lyon fairly easily in the round of 16 and quarterfinals. But they faced a Barcelona side managed by ex-Milan player Frank Rijkaard in the semi-finals. Milan had to settle with a rare loss at the San Siro in the first leg. And drew at the Camp Nou following a controversial decision against Shevchenko.
Non, faute auparavant. Ouais, ici, faute de Shevchenko. Qu'est-ce qu'il va faire, monsieur Merck?
Se resbala Puyol.
In Serie A, Juventus proved their superiority yet again as they won their 29th Scudetto and only lost a single match all season, which was against the Rossoneri at the San Siro. Milan ended the season as runners-up, but with their most points ever at that time, after picking up 88 points. They also equaled the historic Grande Torino record in the 1940s, as they won 18 home matches and drew once in 19 league matches at the San Siro. But all these numbers and records would not mean a single thing, as the biggest scandal in Italian football history was revealed: the Calciopoli. Milan and several other teams were part of the scandal, as they were handed a few different types of punishments. The initial punishment being a 15-point penalty for Milan in the new season and banning them from competing in the Champions League. But after some appeals, the penalty went down to 8 points and they were allowed to compete in the qualifying stage of the Champions League. With all of these punishments and another trophyless season, the Rossoneri were not in the best position. And the situation got worse after Chelsea signed their Ukrainian star Andrei Shevchenko for 43 million euros. The Calciopoli scandal had signaled the end of Italian dominance in the transfer market. It was the start of Serie A's decline, despite the Italian national team just winning the World Cup in the summer. Milan's summer signings reflected that decline to a degree, as they signed with Riccardo Oliveira, Gorkov and Bonera, while departures included Stam, Abbiati and Rui Costa. But despite that, the Rossoneri managed to successfully keep the core of the team to a degree. But the Rossoneri eventually failed to compete for the Scudetto after their 8-point penalty, and the absence of Juve from Serie A made it easier for Inter to finally win the Scudetto. It was obvious that the Rossoneri's focus would now be on the Champions League. It may well be their last chance to win it, given their squad was aging. Even the arrival of Ronaldo and Massimo Odo in January didn't help lower that average squad age. Ronaldo was not even eligible to compete in the Champions League with Milan after playing with Madrid in the same competition earlier in the season. But the team had one big advantage, and that was experience, as Ancelotti's men topped their Champions League group yet again and qualified to the round of 16. They faced Celtic in the next round, which was far from an easy opponent, as after a goalless draw in Scotland, Celtic managed to keep a clean sheet at the San Siro and push the match all the way to extra time. But whenever it gets tough for Milan, Kaka was always there to save the day.
Attenzione, 2 contro 2, Kaka, Gilardino, va via Kaka in velocità, rete! Grandissimo gol da parte di Kaka.
Milan qualified to face Otmar Hitzfeld's Bayern in the quarterfinals, and this time the tie was full of goals and excitement. Despite the draw, Milan gave one of their best performances ever at the Allianz Arena, as Seedorf and Inzaghi both scored and booked their place in the semi-finals.
Gattuso, Seedorf di tacco, Inzaghi, posizione regolare, Inzaghi, super!
Bayern's legendary keeper Oliver Kahn said after the match, Milan are the best team in Europe. They are solid in defense, very fast, and very professional. They must be favorites to win the Champions League. Only 3 English teams and 1 single Italian team was left in the competition. It was an early indicator of the English dominance in European competitions in the following seasons. Milan had to face a Manchester United side that just thrashed Roma by 7-1 in the previous round, and they had a squad full of stars. The first leg at Old Trafford proved the difficult task at hand for Milan.
That's clever. Rooney's there! Goalkeeper couldn't keep it out!
But it also proved that Kaka was the best in the world.
Kaka in area di rigore, palla sul sinistro, rete, Kaka! Gestisce le passate di radiocronaca, Kaka in percussione, cerca l'ingresso in area ancora, Kaka, davanti al portiere, Kaka, rete!
The Brazilian scored a fantastic and important brace away from home, as eventually the loss was easier to swallow. Now the Rossoneri had to go back to San Siro to settle it once and for all. Under the heavy rains in Milan, the Rossoneri played the perfect match, as Ancelotti said in his book. The Tifosi waited only 11 minutes to see the floodgates open.
Gira di testa per Kaka, Kaka dal limite, parte il tiro, rete, il Milan in vantaggio.
ممكن فرصة أخرى صد ضربة الثاني والله الثاني جابها الهولندي ولعها ميلانو.
Sulla rimpallo, Ambrosini, attenzione, campo aperto, parte Gilardino verso l'area avversaria, Gilardino, rete, è finita!
To score 3 goals without reply against eventual English champions, whom had never conceded more than 2 goals throughout the season, was an exceptional feat for Ancelotti's men. They proved yet again that Italian football was still alive and well, despite the Calciopoli scandal. They were back in the Champions League final yet again, which was considered the 8th European final in the Berlusconi era. The match was held in Greece, Athens, and their final opponents were familiar: Liverpool. But this version of Rafa Benitez's side was much better than the 2005 version. They qualified to the final, beating the likes of Barcelona, Eindhoven, and Chelsea yet again. The Reds had some new faces, and the European final was considered evenly matched to a degree. But the Rossoneri exceeded all expectations to get to this point. Their squad's average age was over 30 years old, with several key players suffering from injuries in key moments. But Milan had an advantage, as they had the best player in the world, as Kaka scored 10 European goals in 11 matches prior to the European final. Ancelotti had one big decision to make: his choice of lone striker in the formation. He said in his book, "Everybody advised me to field Inzaghi, but Gilardino was in a better shape than people. The day before the match, I noticed that Inzaghi had the look and attitude of the special moments." In the end, he started Inzaghi in a lineup that contained 7 Italians. On the other side, Benitez entered the final with 6 changes from his side that started the Istanbul final. Is it a match of confirmation for the Reds, or revenge for the Rossoneri? The stadium at Athens will uncover all the secrets of this final.
Torna a Milano, grande festa naturalmente sul campo di Atene. Il Milan conquista.
Paolo Maldini riceve la 7ª Coppa dei Campioni della storia del Milan. I rossoneri sono